Auto safety regulators opening up an investigation into nearly 26,000 Ford engine failure.
A single U.S. law just killed 3 major car brands overnight. Engines that powered generations, gone. Showrooms left scrambling, buyers in total panic. So who passed this law? Why did it strike at the very core of America's auto industry? And what happens when your truck, or even your job, is next? Ford. Across dusty fields, crowded highways, and countless American neighborhoods, one nameplate has echoed louder than almost any other: Ford. When people speak about trucks that shaped not only industries but entire communities, they often begin with the Ford F-150. For decades, stretching back into the mid-20th century, this single model became synonymous with reliability, power, and a no-nonsense toughness that blue-collar families could rely upon every single day. The F-150 was not just a vehicle that carried loads of lumber, tools, livestock feed, or household furniture. It became a faithful companion for farmers, ranchers, construction workers, electricians, and ordinary fathers hauling ball teams or campers to weekend getaways. The soul of the machine for so many years was its straightforward V8 engine. No turbochargers, no complex hybrid systems, no delicate electronics that required expensive dealer visits. Just a durable block of American steel tuned for torque and designed to keep running long after the paint faded and the odometer had rolled past 200,000 miles. The cultural meaning of this truck reached far deeper than the workplace. Owning a Ford with a V8 under the hood became a declaration of identity, a statement of self-reliance. When a man bought an XL trim with a bench seat, vinyl flooring, crank windows, and that simple V8 engine, he was declaring his preference for tools that work over gadgets that distract. He chose rugged strength instead of fragile sophistication. He chose permanence over fads. Then came the sweeping legislation. In the year 2024, Washington announced new nationwide fleet fuel efficiency standards that eliminated long-standing loopholes for light trucks. The formula that once permitted companies to average out their fuel consumption with larger work vehicles were rewritten. The calculation no longer gave breathing room for millions of affordable V8-powered F-150XL models. In blunt economic terms, every unit sold made the overall Ford fleet numbers crash through the government ceiling. Each penalty reached into the thousands of dollars, multiplied across hundreds of thousands of trucks. Executives realized that keeping the base V8 alive meant financial ruin. So, with one boardroom decision, the heart of America's best-selling truck was silenced. Beyond the spreadsheets and policy papers, the Silverado small block was also a symbol of pride at the local level. It was the truck that hauled church groups to summer camps, pulled parade floats on Main Street, and carried Little League teams home after championship games. Its sound announced its arrival long before it rounded the corner, and neighbors recognized it without a glance. Taking that away is not only removing horsepower, it is silencing a familiar voice in countless towns. For many, it feels like losing an old friend who was always there when needed. The deeper tragedy of Ford's forced transition is how it alters the generational rhythm of American truck life. For nearly 70 years, families passed down F-155-8s the way others might hand down heirlooms or farm tools. A grandfather's truck, dented and scarred, became a father's hunting rig and later a son's first vehicle, still running because the design was simple enough to be rebuilt endlessly in home garages. That legacy gave the F-150 a mythic quality. It was more than a machine. It was a storyteller on wheels, carrying memories embedded in every scratch and stain. The new era, defined by turbochargers, battery packs, and electronic modules, severs that continuity. Modern components may deliver performance, but they lack the intimacy of repairable machinery. You cannot sit with your child on a Saturday, hands greasy, teaching them how to rebuild a turbocharger module designed to be sealed and discarded. With each regulation, that tradition slips further into memory. Ford's V8 F-150XL was not only about hauling loads, it was about teaching resilience, independence, and craft. Its disappearance leaves an absence that spreadsheets cannot measure and marketing slogans cannot replace. The consequences rippled far beyond Ford dealerships. On job sites where contractors once praised the simplicity of their F-150XLs, doubt replaced certainty. The newer turbocharged V6 engines boasted glossy efficiency figures, but lacked the battle-tested reputation. Hybrids promised innovation, but carried unfamiliar complexities, with batteries and control systems that small-town mechanics struggled to service. For men who prided themselves on being able to fix their own machines with a socket set and a Saturday afternoon, the shift felt like betrayal. The straightforward V8, which had powered generations, disappeared not because buyers rejected it, but because regulations demanded it vanish. Consider the emotional cost. Fathers once taught their sons how to change spark plugs, replace belts, and diagnose a rumbling sound by ear on that simple V8. Those lessons were rites of passage, stitched into family identity. Now, those same sons face engine bays dominated by plastic covers, diagnostic ports, and components that no longer allow intuitive repairs. Instead of learning with wrenches, they must learn with laptop screens. The law did not simply end a drivetrain, it severed a chain of cultural continuity. The used truck market reacted instantly. Listings for clean, low-mileage V8 XL models surged in price. Dealers reported men arriving with cash in hand, desperate to secure what might be the last truly simple Ford truck they would ever own. Online forums filled with anxious debates about how long the aftermarket could supply parts. Small repair shops stocked up on components, preparing for a wave of loyalists determined to keep their V8s alive for another decade. Or maybe two. From an economic perspective, Ford attempted to soften the blow. Executives highlighted the new twin-turbocharged EcoBoost 5.6 engines as equal or superior in output, promising that towing numbers and payload ratings remained competitive. Marketing campaigns emphasized efficiency gains, tax incentives, and cutting-edge technology. Yet among longtime truckmen, these promises rang hollow. They did not want marginally higher torque curves produced by complicated engineering. They wanted the straightforward reliability of displacement, forged through half a century of experience. Stories began to surface across the Midwest, the South, and the Plains states. A rancher in Texas parked his brand new hybrid Ford next to his well-worn F-150 V8 and admitted that he trusted the older truck more despite its dents and faded paint. A contractor in Ohio spoke of regretting his trade-in after realizing that the newer powertrain demanded specialized servicing he could not perform in his own barn. These voices echoed across radio shows, barbershops, diners, and union halls, reinforcing the sense of loss. Ford, of course, had no choice. The financial penalties imposed by the legislation threatened billions of dollars in fines. In a global market where every automaker must balance books with ruthless precision, sentiment could not override survival. And yet, the company knew the symbolic damage was incalculable. They had cut away not just a product, but a part of their soul. For the average American truck buyer, the disappearance of the V8 XL trim represented more than a change in catalog. It symbolized a broader shift in values, away from mechanical honesty and toward regulatory compliance. It revealed the growing divide between policymakers in Washington and the men in steel-toed boots who keep America running. As we leave behind the Ford chapter, one cannot help but wonder if the undisputed king of trucks was forced to surrender its most faithful engine. What brand could possibly hold the line against this legislative tide? The answer takes us deeper into the heart of American automotive pride, where another legendary name, synonymous with raw power and iconic performance branding, now faces its own reckoning. And that, my friends, brings us to the next casualty of this sweeping transformation. If this hit home and you feel the loss already, smash that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every story from real truck owners. Ram. Legends are not born overnight. They are forged over decades of grit, pride, and reputation, and few badges carried more raw emotional weight for truck buyers than those three unmistakable letters, H-E-M-I. For countless drivers stretching back to the post-war years, Ram became synonymous with unapologetic muscle. The 5.7-liter Hemi 5.8 was more than just a power plant. It was thunder-bottled in cast iron and aluminum, a torque-rich companion that sang with baritone authority as it pulled horse trailers, fifth wheels, construction loads, and Sunday toys. Owners boasted about the badge on their fender, the way soldiers display medals of service. It was not a luxury accessory. It was the backbone of pride. The history of the Ram Hemi era traces back to the mid-20th century, when Chrysler engineers first experimented with hemispherical combustion chambers. By the 1950s, this design was reshaping drag strips and speedways. But the rebirth that most modern Americans remember arrived in the early 2000s, when the 5.7-liter Hemi 5.8 returned in the Ram 1500. Overnight, a simple pickup transformed into a cultural event. Television commercials screamed, "That thing got a HEMI!" and blue-collar men across America answered yes with proud grins. The engine's blend of affordability, durability, and unmistakable sound became irresistible. Contractors parked them beside job trailers, fathers used them to tow campers, and young men lined up at stoplights just to feel the surge of torque through their spine. Another layer of heartbreak lies in how the HEMI name itself was more than a technical term. It was a badge of honor. Owners wore HEMI hats, plastered HEMI stickers on their toolboxes, and introduced themselves at car meets by proudly announcing their trucks carried that engine. The disappearance of those three letters erases a social bond as much as it removes a drivetrain. It severs a handshake language that connected farmers, racers, and contractors across states, a brotherhood that found common ground in a single shared word: HEMI. For nearly 2 decades, this Hemi-powered Ram 1500 represented the quintessential American truck: tough, loud, simple, and endlessly capable. But then came the federal government's new regulations in the year 2024. Lawmakers recalibrated the entire system of fleet-wide fuel efficiency and carbon output. Gone were the loopholes that had allowed light-duty trucks to operate with greater leniency. Every manufacturer was now bound by the same unyielding mathematical formulas. For Ram, the beloved HEMI line transformed overnight from a bestseller into a financial liability. Each unit sold dragged the company's fleet averages further into penalty territory. Every fine levied against Chrysler's truck division could measure in thousands of dollars, multiplied by hundreds of thousands of units. No business could sustain that. The corporate boardroom verdict was swift but devastating. The 5.7-liter Hemi would be retired, and the entire identity surrounding that badge would vanish with it. Engineers shifted the spotlight to the new Hurricane inline-6 turbocharged platform. On paper, the numbers were impressive. Output equaled or even surpassed the older V8, while efficiency satisfied the new legal standards. But numbers alone cannot fill the emotional vacuum left behind. For men who had grown up with the Hemi rumble echoing across parking lots and farm fields, the change felt like an erasure of identity. The cultural fallout was immediate. Enthusiasts flooded dealerships in a rush to secure final model HEMI trucks. Prices for low-mileage used examples spiked across auction sites. Internet forums and social media groups buzzed with strategies to preserve these machines for decades, from hoarding spare cylinder heads to organizing networks of independent mechanics who promised to keep the V8 alive long after corporate support faded. Owners spoke about the change in mournful tones, comparing the end of the HEMI era to the loss of a family member. There was also anger. In diners from Oklahoma to Pennsylvania, conversations turned sharp. Men in steel-toed boots and dusty ball caps voiced frustration that politicians in Washington, far removed from hauling gravel or towing cattle, had decided what kind of engines hardworking Americans could buy. To them, the new laws felt less like progress and more like punishment. Why should the proud roar of a HEMI be silenced when it had faithfully served generations? Why should heritage be sacrificed to satisfy an equation scribbled on government paper? Yet the corporate leaders at Ram had no alternative. The financial penalties threatened billions of dollars. Global competition left no room for sentimentality. The badge was struck down not because of lack of demand. Demand had never been stronger, but because regulations made its existence unsustainable. The irony was cruel. Just as the HEMI reached peak cultural visibility, its future was pulled from beneath it. Ram dealerships scrambled to shift the narrative. Salespeople were instructed to highlight the advanced technology of the Hurricane Inline-6. Advertisements emphasized improved miles per gallon and cutting-edge engineering. Promotional videos promised that towing and payload capacities remained equal or superior to the old V8. But deep down, the target audience, the men who equated trucks with strength, loyalty, and tradition, sensed something hollow. The new numbers might have impressed government spreadsheets, but they did not stir the blood the way the word Hemi once did. In garages across America, fathers spoke wistfully to sons about the glory days. They described how the throttle pedal once unleashed a thunderclap of torque, how the truck would squat under heavy load and still surge forward without complaint. Those lessons became stories rather than experiences, because the sons would never buy a brand new Ram with that kind of engine again. They could inherit one, restore one, or cherish one from the past, but they could never walk into a dealership and order one built fresh from the factory floor. The end of the HEMI era thus symbolizes more than a technical change. It represents a fracture in continuity, a forced break in a tradition that stretched back generations. It highlights the widening gulf between policy and practice, between urban regulation and rural reality. It proves that even legends can be dismantled when the letter of the law outweighs the voice of the people. For Ram, survival means reinvention. The Hurricane Inline 6 will define the future. Hybrid systems and eventual electric options will appear. Perhaps these platforms will prove capable, perhaps even superior in measurable performance. But capability alone cannot erase memory. The sound, the feel, the pride of saying I drive a HEMI cannot be replaced. That chapter is closed forever. As the dust settles, one sobering question remains. If Ram's mighty HEMI, adored by millions and central to the brand's identity, could be wiped away with the stroke of a pen, what sacred emblem could possibly be safe? The answer lies with another Detroit giant, where pushrod 5/8s defined an era, where loyalists swore allegiance as if it were a religion. The stage is set for the most devastating blow of all, a revelation that will send shockwaves through every Chevy loyalist from Michigan to Montana. Prepare yourself, because the final chapter of this countdown strikes at the beating heart of Chevrolet. Before we reach the final reveal, subscribe right now. You don't want to miss what comes next. The biggest shock yet, and the one that could impact your life directly. Chevrolet. There are brands that build vehicles, and then there are brands that carve themselves into the national identity so deeply that their very names feel like part of the language of America. Chevrolet belongs in the latter category. For well over a century, the bow tie badge has symbolized everyday dependability, hard-working grit, and accessible performance for the masses. Within Chevrolet's long list of products, no machine carried the cultural crown more proudly than the Silverado series of trucks. And at the heart of the Silverado legacy rested the small block V8 engines, especially the 5.3-liter and the 6.2-liter variants. These engines were not simply mechanical devices. They were modern heirlooms, descendants of the small block revolution that began back in 1955. Chevrolet's small block V8 defined generations of drivers. By the late 20th century and the opening decades of the 21st, the Silverado 1500 equipped with a small block became a national workhorse. Ranchers trusted it to drag livestock trailers across dusty backroads. Contractors loaded the beds with cinder blocks, lumber, and tools. Families used them for cross-country trips, pulling campers with confidence. Teenagers, too, looked upon the Silverado V8 as the initiation into adulthood. Your first true truck, the one you bought with your savings from long hours at the shop or the oil field. The roar of those engines, deep and confident, was as much a soundtrack of America as the crack of a baseball bat or the whistle of a freight train. Yet in the year 2024, the same sweeping regulatory change that silenced Ford's base V8 and dismantled Ram's HEMI empire arrived at Chevrolet's doorstep. Federal lawmakers rewrote fuel economy and carbon emission standards, tightening every loophole that once allowed full-size trucks to thrive with large displacement engines. The calculations were merciless. For every Silverado sold with a 5.3 or 6.2 small block V8, the company's fleet averages suffered crushing penalties. The fines per vehicle stretched into thousands of dollars. Multiplied across hundreds of thousands of units, the totals threatened billions in losses. Corporate accountants, engineers, and executives gathered, and the conclusion came fast. The beloved small block Silverado trims could no longer survive. Chevrolet announced the phase-out quietly, almost sheepishly, as though they understood the backlash that was coming. The future, they said, lay in turbocharged inline 4s, inline 6s, hybridized drivetrains, and eventually electric platforms. They pointed to torque figures, efficiency gains, and acceleration numbers. On paper, the replacements could compete or even surpass the old guard. But paper does not stir the soul. What mattered to truckmen across the plains, the hills, and the heartland was not a line graph, but the visceral feeling of a small block engine pulling hard beneath them, a mechanical promise of loyalty and strength. The cultural earthquake that followed was immediate. Across auction sites, used small block Silverados surged in value. Dealerships witnessed a run on remaining inventory as buyers scrambled to secure the last factory-fresh 5.3 and 6.2 trucks. Mechanics began stockpiling parts. Enthusiast clubs organized preservation groups. Fathers urged their sons to keep the family Silverado maintained because the next generation would never know the same driving experience. Internet forums filled with laments, comparisons, and vows never to trade away their V8. In small towns from Nebraska to Tennessee, conversations turned to frustration and disbelief. Men who had trusted Chevrolet for decades now felt betrayed not by the company, but by a government mandate. They argued that the small block V8 was more than transportation, it was tradition. They wondered why lawmakers in far-off offices could decide the fate of engines that had kept America's backbone industries moving. For them, the bow tie badge represented continuity. Now continuity itself had been broken. Consider the symbolic loss. The Chevrolet small block had been in continuous production in one form or another since that fateful year 1955. For nearly 70 years, it had evolved, refined, and proven itself across drag strips, highways, farms, and job sites. To have it effectively legislated out of existence felt, to many, like tearing a flag from its pole. The engine that built hot rods, carried soldiers home, and powered family memories had been outlawed not by market rejection, but by political decree. Chevrolet attempted to pivot. Commercials celebrated the advanced design of the new engines. Executives boasted about global competitiveness. Marketing departments produced campaigns about the Silverado's continuing toughness, regardless of what powered it. But every ad felt like a hollow echo. Buyers were not fooled. The Silverado might remain. The sheet metal might carry the same name, but the small block heartbeat had been silenced. In the emotional landscape of truck owners, anger mixed with defiance. Some swore never to buy another new Chevrolet again, pledging loyalty only to the used market where true small blocks could still be found. Others stockpiled parts in barns and garages, vowing to keep their engines alive for decades. A few spoke of swapping engines into newer chassis, an outlaw act of resistance against both regulators and corporate conformity. For many, it was not about efficiency or even raw horsepower numbers. It was about trust, heritage, and the sense that something authentically American had been taken away. The ripple extended beyond the buyers. Independent shops, parts suppliers, and aftermarket tuners who had built entire businesses on the small block ecosystem faced an uncertain future. Without a steady stream of factory-fresh small block trucks, their markets shrank. Communities that had gathered around Saturday morning car meets or Friday night drags lost part of their cultural center. The bow tie had always been more than a logo. It was a banner uniting mechanics, builders, racers, and workers. Now, that banner fluttered with a tear. Still, as with all endings, there was reflection. Owners shared stories. The time a Silverado pulled a neighbor's tractor from the mud. The road trips powered by a steady V8 hum. The first time a father handed keys to his son. These stories transformed into oral history. Reminders that even when production lines stop, memory continues. And perhaps that is what will keep the legend alive. Chevrolet itself faces a precarious path. To survive, it must embrace electrification, hybridization, and government compliance. But to remain Chevrolet, it must somehow carry forward the emotional essence of the small block. That challenge may prove impossible, for emotion cannot be engineered by committee. And so we arrive at the final truth. The death of Chevrolet's small block V8 under the Silverado banner is not simply the loss of an engine or even the loss of a trim package. It is the silencing of an anthem that played for nearly 7 decades. It is the fading of a voice that spoke in the rumble of 8 cylinders. A voice that told Americans they were strong enough, capable enough, and resilient enough to handle anything the road demanded. As the countdown concludes, the reality stands stark. Ford's base V8 fell, Ram's HEMI line collapsed, and now Chevrolet's small block legend joins them in the graveyard of regulation. The question for America's truckmen is no longer whether the past can return. It cannot. The question is, how to carry forward the spirit of those machines into a future designed by lawmakers rather than by mechanics. The story does not end with silence. It ends with memory, and memory can never be outlawed. This is where we end today, but the fight over America's trucks is only just beginning. You've seen how Ford fell, how Ram collapsed, and how Chevrolet's legend faces the blade. Now it's your turn. Hit that like button, drop your story in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss the truth the headlines hide. Because the next wave of changes is already coming, and the only way to stay ahead is to stay here with us.